tragedy or justice. In a breathless moment of silence, the defendant stood up. A single word was spoken, and the entire legal system trembled. The scene in the Kings County courtroom in Brooklyn, New York was heavy, the air almost suffocating. The courtroom benches were packed with spectators, whispers rippling through the crowd as every eye locked onto the young man standing before the court. The defendant's table seemed far too large for the teenager standing beside it, hands shoved into his pockets, chin raised high, as if he feared nothing. Jordan Reyes, 19 years old, was charged with grand theft auto and resisting arrest. Although these were serious charges, the way Judge Laura Mitchell looked at him made it clear that this trial wasn't really about the law. The judge leaned back, tapping his fingers lightly against the polished wooden bench. He peered at Jordan over the rim of his glasses, lips pressed into a tight line, wearing a sneer of disdain. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. "This isn't a debate club, kid." A few bursts of laughter echoed from the audience. The bailiff, the court clerk, even the prosecutor, all clearly amused by the judge's jab. Jordan's expression remained unchanged. He didn't laugh. He had spent years preparing for this moment. Not exactly this moment, but he knew every detail of the courtroom by heart. While his friends memorized basketball stats, Jordan memorized case law. While others played video games, he argued mock trials against himself, debating imaginary lawsuits. His mother, Denise Dawson, had worked as a legal assistant for over 20 years. Jordan grew up on her stories about how prosecutors often withheld evidence, about biased judges, and about defense attorneys who barely even tried. He soaked it all in, and by the age of 14, Jordan could analyze a trial better than most law students. But to Mitchell, none of that mattered. To him, Jordan was just another troubled kid. "Let's keep this moving," the judge sighed, opening the case file. "I've got a tea time at 2. Laughter broke out again, but this time something had shifted. Jordan's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, so faint it was almost invisible. Because Mitchell had just made his first mistake, and no one else seemed to notice. Prosecutor Mitchell Carrington stood up, exuding the confidence of a man certain he was about to win. His suit was sharp, his tie perfectly knotted, and his voice steady, with the practiced tone of someone who had delivered this speech hundreds of times. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that the defendant, Jordan Dawson, was caught red-handed operating a stolen vehicle. A 2022 Audi 06 had been reported missing just a few hours before he was apprehended. Police officers pursued him through downtown, where he allegedly tried to flee before being caught. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. We submit that the evidence speaks for itself." His words hung heavy in the air, and the courtroom buzzed again. On the surface, it all seemed straightforward: a stolen car, a chase, and a suspect who tried to run. Judge Mitchell glanced at Jordan over his glasses, then turned his gaze back to Carrington. "Proceed." The prosecutor strode toward the jury box, his leather shoes clicking sharply with every step. "The defense may try to convince you that this was just an unfortunate misunderstanding, that Mr. Dawson was simply a victim of circumstance. But honestly, think about it. Would an innocent person run from the police?" The tension in the courtroom grew thicker. Judge Mitchell leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Jordan didn't blink. Carrington continued, flipping through a stack of evidence papers. "Your Honor, I have here the testimony of Officer Daniel Ruiz, who personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel before he attempted to flee." The courtroom grew silent as the decision was announced. The car had been confirmed stolen, and the arrest had been properly executed. Mitchell exhaled through his nose, nodded, and maintained a calm expression. "Looks pretty straightforward to me," he said. "For most people in the room, it probably was." The case was clear. A stolen car, a chase, an arrest. But Jordan, who had spent years studying trials, couldn't help but notice the cracks, the details that didn't quite add up. Still, he stayed silent, simply sitting there, observing and waiting. Judge Mitchell lightly tapped his gavel. "All right, let's hear from the defense." He turned to Jordan's lawyer, a public defender named Lisa Thornton, who had hardly said a word since entering the courtroom. He stood up, slightly trembling. "Your Honor, my client—" Jordan placed a hand on her arm, a silent request for her to stop. Lisa hesitated for a moment, then sat down. And then, for the first time, Jordan spoke. "Your Honor, I will represent myself." The entire courtroom instantly fell silent. Mitchell looked at him, seemingly trying to suppress a smile. Jordan responded in a calm, steady voice. "I will represent myself?" A murmur spread throughout the courtroom. The clerks exchanged surprised glances. Carrington, the prosecutor, looked at Jordan with a smirk, a flicker of surprise flashing across his face before he let out a sharp, mocking laugh. This should be interesting. But no one was laughing when Jordan stepped forward. Everything in the courtroom began to shift from that moment. The tension thickened as Jordan stood firm, his hands still tucked in his pockets. He allowed the silence to stretch just a little longer, long enough to make everyone uncomfortable, before finally speaking. "Your Honor, before I begin, I would like to confirm something with the prosecution." Carrington raised an eyebrow, crossed his arms, and replied in a dismissive tone. "Go ahead." Jordan took a slow step forward and spoke. "You said that Officer Daniel Ruiz personally witnessed me driving the car before I was arrested, correct?" Carrington sighed, clearly disinterested. "That's right, and it's documented in his report." Jordan nodded and turned toward Judge Mitchell. "Your Honor, I move to suppress this testimony as evidence." Mitchell furrowed his brow, looking at Jordan in surprise. "On what grounds?" For the first time, Jordan pulled his hands out of his pockets and pointed at the prosecution's table. "Because Officer Ruiz never actually saw me inside that car. In fact, he wasn't even present when the chase began." A flicker of confusion crossed Carrington's face. "Ha ha ha, what are you talking about?" Jordan took another slow step forward. "Your Honor, if the court permits, I would like to request the GPS log from Officer Ruiz for that night. If his report claims he saw me driving the vehicle, then his GPS data should match his location history. But I have a feeling it won't."
These words made the tension in the courtroom even thicker. The whispers from the spectators grew louder. Mitchell furrowed his brow and glanced at Carrington, his eyes full of suspicion. "Counselor Carrington," Mitchell said, "does the prosecution have any objection to checking the officer's GPS data?" Heber peered at her for a second, then looked away, the silence stretching long enough for everyone in the room to feel it. Jordan took a quiet breath. He had spent years observing trials, studying prosecutors, how they manipulated the system, and he knew one thing for sure. If Carrington was truly confident in his case, he wouldn't be hesitating like this. Mitchell sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Counselor Carrington," he repeated. "No objection?" Finally, Carrington took a deep breath and shook his head. "No objection, Your Honor." But by then, everything had changed. No one in the room was laughing anymore. The tension was so thick that no one dared breathe too hard. Carrington flipped through his documents, his confidence visibly starting to crack. "Your Honor, while we await the GPS data, there's still a crucial point. The defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen car." Jordan nodded slightly, his face unreadable. That's correct, he said. So let's talk about that piece of evidence. Mitchell raised an eyebrow and gestured for him to continue. Jordan turned to the jury, his eyes meeting each juror one by one. The prosecution wants you to believe bending my fingerprints in the car means I stole it. That's the story they're selling you, Jordan said, his voice calm, but his eyes locked onto Carrington. But let's think about this logically. He took a deep breath, keeping his voice steady and controlled. Imagine you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hand in the pocket, zip it up, and then put the jacket back on the rack and leave. Period. A few hours later, someone steals that jacket. Does the fact that your fingerprints are on the jacket make you the thief? Some members of the jury exchanged glances, and a small murmur broke out from the spectators. But Jordan didn't give them time to recover. The car we're talking about was parked outside a 7-Eleven for hours before it was allegedly stolen. At that time, I was inside the store with 3 of my friends. And yes, when we passed by the car, I leaned against it and even opened the door because it had been left unlocked. I didn't think much of it. Didn't steal the car, didn't drive it, didn't take anything from inside. It was just a dumb moment of curiosity. He paused briefly, letting his words sink in, then spoke with a voice as sharp as a blade cutting through the silence. So, does merely touching something make you a criminal? Carrington cleared his throat and shuffled through his notes, desperately trying to regain control. But Jordan wasn't done yet. And while we're at it, let's talk about how the fingerprint analysis was conducted, he said, turning to Judge Mitchell. Your Honor was the forensic expert in this case ever called to testify. Mitchell raised an eyebrow, seemingly caught off guard by the question. He glanced at Carrington, who hesitated before finally responding, his voice full of uncertainty. Jordan stayed silent for a second, then pressed his lips together. So let me get this straight. The state is using forensic evidence to try and convict me. But they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the expert who conducted the fingerprint analysis? No opportunity for me to cross-examine, no chance to review the chain of evidence or to challenge the accuracy of the analysis? Carrington stiffened, his jaw clenching tightly. Jordan gave a slight nod, as if he had just confirmed everything he needed to know. Interesting, he said. Judge Mitchell sighed and rubbed his forehead. What he had assumed would be an easy win was quickly spiraling into something far more complicated. But Jordan wasn't finished. What he was about to say next would change everything. Jordan took a slow step forward, his voice strong and unwavering. Your Honor, I would like to submit into evidence a formal statement from the owner of the vehicle. Mitchell furrowed his brow, looking confused. The owner? Jordan nodded. Yes, Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the legal owner of the stolen Audi, provided a statement to the police that, for some reason, was never included in the prosecution's file. And I think I know why. He turned toward Carrington, his eyes sharp. Do you remember what Mr. Whitaker told the officers the night the car was reported stolen? Carrington stiffened again, his jaw tightening even more. Jordan didn't wait for an answer. He pulled a copy of the statement from his folder and read aloud. I left my car running while I went into the convenience store. Probably some kid jumped in and drove off. But it wasn't the guy you caught. I saw the kid and he was white. A wave of shock rippled across the court. A gasp broke out from the audience. Jordan held up the paper. This is from the original police report, the one the prosecution conveniently overlooked. He turned back to Judge Mitchell. The officer acknowledged this in his statement, and the prosecution ignored it. Yet they expect this jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the real thief's description, committed this crime? Harrington quickly stepped forward. Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in the vehicle. But Jordan shook his head, not rushing. His voice remained calm, each word slicing through the silence like a blade. No, I was not the one driving that car. He didn't raise his voice, but it echoed clearly throughout the courtroom. I was apprehended several blocks away from the vehicle on my way home after buying snacks with my friends. I wasn't in the car, I wasn't near the car, and I wasn't running from anyone. The only thing connecting me to this case is sloppy police work and mistaken assumptions. Judge Mitchell sighed again, rubbing his forehead. The case was unraveling fast, and everyone in the courtroom could feel it. Jordan turned back to the jury, his gaze steady and unshakable. The real criminal got away that night. The officer saw a young black man near the area and decided that was good enough. That's the real story behind this case. Silence fell again, long and suffocating like a held breath. Mitchell gently cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and asked in a calm but heavy voice, "Does the prosecution have anything else?" Harrington stood frozen, his face turning bright red. "No, Your Honor," he said, his voice tight with tension and anger. Judge Mitchell let out a long breath, his gaze lingering on Jordan for a long moment before turning toward the jury. The entire courtroom seemed crushed under the weight of silence, everyone holding their breath. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke the words that would be forever etched into everyone's memory. He's dismissed.
For a second there was silence, and then the courtroom erupted. Half the room couldn't believe it, while the other half exhaled in relief. The courtroom buzzed with noise, reporters scrambling to take notes. But Jordan didn't move quickly. He let the moment settle, allowing everyone to absorb the reality. Judge Mitchell still gripped his gavel, staring at Jordan with an unreadable expression. There was something different in his eyes, perhaps recognition, maybe even a hint of regret. Jordan looked back at him, then turned and walked away. But just as he neared the door, the judge spoke again. "Mr. Dawson." Jordan stopped, but didn't turn around. Mitchell hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, he said, "You should consider studying law." Jordan smirked slightly, a flash of confidence on his face. "I don't need to consider it," he replied, his voice calm and steady. "I'm already on the path." As he stepped out of the courthouse, the air was filled with noise. Reporters swarmed around him, cameras flashing non-stop, microphones shoved toward him like weapons. "Jordan, did you know the judge would dismiss the case?" one reporter shouted. "What's your next move?" another called out. "How does it feel to beat an experienced prosecutor?" someone else asked. Jordan pulled his hoodie up, ignoring the barrage of questions. He wasn't interested in the attention. This wasn't about proving how smart he was. This was about something much bigger. His mother, Denise, stood waiting at the bottom of the courthouse steps. She stood with her arms crossed, her face unreadable. For a long moment she simply looked at him, then finally sighed and shook her head. "You scared me half to death," she said. Jordan chuckled softly, scratching his head. "Had to take a chance, Mom," he said. She looked at him a moment longer, then pulled him into a hug. "You've always been so stubborn," she said. Cameras continued to flash, but Jordan no longer paid them any attention. Across the street, next to his car, Judge Mitchell stood watching. His posture had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something deeper. Reflection. The smile he once wore was gone, replaced by a different expression. Recognition of what had just happened. He hadn't expected this case to be anything more than another routine day, another case, another defendant, another guilty plea. But now he knew this case would haunt him, because Jordan had done something most people never could. He had forced the system to look at itself, and for the first time, it had to back down. And that was the lesson. How many other cases had unfolded the same way? How many people had been convicted not because of evidence but because of prejudice, mistaken assumptions, and a system more concerned with closing cases than seeking the truth? Jordan had the knowledge and courage to fight, but what about those who never had that chance? This wasn't just about one case. It was about all the cases. Jordan knew exactly what he needed to do next. This courtroom wouldn't be the last place he stood, but next time he wouldn't be the defendant. He would be the attorney. And when that day came, he wouldn't be fighting alone. If this story made you think, even for a second, Jordan's voice echoed in the courtroom, share it. The justice system is built on laws, but it's run by people. And people can change, but only if we do it together. He paused, then smiled softly. Hit the like button, subscribe for more important stories, and let's keep this conversation going. Because next time, it might not be Jordan standing. It might be someone you know. Someone who needs a second chance. Someone who deserves justice.